What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to build an AI chatbot using Node.js and the ChatGPT API with the GPT 3.5 turbo model. So you'll essentially have ChatGPT running in your terminal. And I'm going to give you a quick demo before we start. So I have the program running and I can send any request I want to the API. I'll just say hello. And we get, hello, how can I assist you today? And I'm just going to say, what is the capital of Florida? And it's going to give me back the capital of Florida is Tallahassee. Now, the way that we're going to write this code is so we save our chat history and we send that with each request. That way we can have an ongoing conversation. So I should be able to say, what is the population? And it should know what I'm talking about. Okay, so as of 21, population of Tallahassee, blah, blah, blah. So it knows that I'm referencing what I just asked. All right, and then you can also ask for like code samples. I'll say, how do I write a fetch request in JavaScript? And it does take a second. All right, so if we look up here, to make a fetch request in JavaScript, you use the fetch function and it gives us an example and then it tells us what the example does. And I could easily copy this and put it into my own code. And I could ask questions about it. I could reference it in any way. All right, so I think it's pretty cool. You can just have this open on your desktop, and if you need information on whatever, you can just go ahead and prompt it. And then to exit, we just type exit. And there we go. So now we're out of the program. So that's what we're going to build, and we're going to use the official OpenAI library for Node.js. That's what this is. And then we're going to use a package called ReadlineSync, which allows us to prompt the user. So we're going to use this question method, and that's how we're able to continuously type it and have a conversation with the bot. All right, we'll also be using .env to store our API key, and then colors to give us colors in the console. And then this is the final code. This is the repository. I'll have the link to this in the description. And I'll probably use this for ongoing projects to show you some of the new features with the API, such as function calls. That's something that I want to get into. We'll probably get into within the next month or so, and I'll probably use this as a starting point. All right, so that's it. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, guys, so I have an empty folder called ChatGPT Chatbot. So just create that folder and open up your text editor, whether it's VS Code or whatever it is you're using, as well as a terminal. And the first thing we're going to do is in this folder, we're going to run npm init, which will initialize a package.json file. And it's going to ask us some questions. And the package name I'm actually going to call Chatbot, because if you do decide to use npm link and run this as a global command, that's going to be the command that you run. And then the version, we can use that. Description, I'll say Chatbot powered by ChatGPT. And then index, that's fine, that's fine. Keywords, author, of course you can put your own name here. And let's say MIT for the license. Okay, so now we have our package.json. Now, as far as dependencies go, let's say npm install, and OpenAI is the library we're going to be using to make our request to ChatGPT. And then I'm also going to install ReadlineSync. That's going to allow us to interact with the user and ask a question, and we can answer and so on. Basically, give us that conversation flow. And then we're going to install .env so that we can store our API key in that. And then I'm also going to install colors, which is optional, but it does look better when there's different colors, so you can tell who the user is and who the bot is. So let's go ahead and install those. All right, now I'm going to open up my package.json here, and I'm going to just add a start script. You can run it with node index, or we can run npm start. So in here, let's say node and then index.js. Now another thing I'm going to do is add a type module, because I want to use ES modules instead of using the common JS syntax. So let's go ahead and add a type and set that to module if you want to. If you want to use common JS, then you don't have to do this. All right, so now that we've done that, let's create our index.js, which is our entry point. And the first thing I want to do, actually the first thing we have to do is get our API key. So let's go over to OpenAI and let's see, I'm not logged in here. So you just want to get your key, whether you have a free account or a paid account. You can go right here, view API keys, and you can create a new key. I already have mine, so I'm not going to create a new one, but just go ahead and click create. It'll show it, and then you can copy it. And then what you're going to do with that is come to your application and create in the root here a .env file. And this is where your global environment variables will go. So I'm just going to grab my key real quick. So I'm creating a variable called OpenAI API Key, and then I'm setting it here. So just go ahead and do that. Make sure you use your own. I'm going to delete this one after anyway, and then save that. So we're going to start by importing a few things from the OpenAI library. And those two things are going to be the configuration class, and then so uppercase O, uppercase AI, and then uppercase A, PI. I believe that's how it's formatted. And the first thing we want to do, actually, we're going to also import .env because we need to get our API key. And in order to use .env, we have to call the config method. So let's say .env.config. Okay, now what we want to do is create a configuration object. So we'll call this configuration and set that equal to a new uppercase C configuration object. And then that's going to take in an object literal with the API key. And we can get that with process.env and then open AI underscore API underscore key. Okay, now we need to take this configuration object and we need to pass it into a new instance of this here. So I'm going to create a variable called OpenAI, all lowercase, set that to new OpenAI API, and we're going to pass in the configuration object that we just created. So now we're ready to make requests with this object. So I'm going to create actually, you know what? Since we're using, we're going to use a method on this object called create chat completion, and that's asynchronous, so we need to use a sync await. So let's create an async function, and we'll call it main. And then we're going to call that function down here. And then what I'll do is create a variable called chat completion, and let's set that to await, and then take our OpenAI object and call create chat completion. Okay, and that's going to take in a couple things. So pass in an object with the model. The model that we're using is GPT-3.5-Turbo. And then we're also going to pass in messages, and this is going to be an array. Now we're only sending one message, but you can send multiple messages. So it still has to be an array even though it's just one message. It's going to be an object, and it's going to have two things, a role, and in this case the role is user because we're the one making the request, the user. When we get a response back, the role of that response will be assistant because that's the API. So we're the user, and we want to send the content of whatever we want to say to basically to ChatGPT. So I'm just going to say, what is the capital of Massachusetts? I mean, you can say anything, whatever you want if you want to say something different. But that's the text, that's the prompt that I'm sending to ChatGPT through this API, through this library. All right, now let's see what that gives us. So still within the main function, but outside of that chat completion variable, let's just log chat completion and see what that gives us. So we can run npm start, So this is what it gives us, a whole bunch of stuff up here that we don't really need to pay attention to. But in this data object, there's the ID, there's the model, and then the choices is really what we want to pay attention to, because that's where the answer to this is. So let's say instead of just logging the whole object, we'll say chat completion dot data and then dot choices, which we can see is an array with one object in it. So let's say choices and then 0 to see what that one object is. So let's clear that. We'll run it again. And now what we get back is an object with an index. Since we only sent one message, this index will always be 0. But if there were multiple messages sent, then we'd have multiple indexes. And the reason it finished is because it stopped, because we just asked a question, it answered. And then this message object, as you can see, has a role of assistant. We're the user, this is the assistant. And then the content says the capital of Massachusetts is Boston. So what we really want is this content value in this message object. So here, let's say dot message and then dot content. And then if we clear this up and run this again, we should just see the answer. There we go. All right, so this is how the API works, making a request and getting a response. So now that we know that, let's move on to create the actual chatbot where we can go on and have a conversation. And what I want to do is actually put this stuff in a separate file, because you might want to use this OpenAI object somewhere else. You might want to call either this method or another one, because there's a bunch of different things, different APIs you can use for different things. So what I'm going to do is create a folder called config. And in config, I'll create, let's say, OpenAI.js, or we'll call it open-AI.js. And then I'm going to move this stuff. Let's see, we're going to take this and move that into here. And then all I want to do is export this variable. So down here, we'll say export default. And remember, I'm using the ES module syntax. If you're using CommonJS, then you would do module.exports. But I'm going to do export default OpenAI. And then come back here, and we should then just be able to bring in, we'll say import OpenAI from, and then /config/OpenAI, and we have to do .js if we're using the import, the ES module syntax with Node.js. All right, so let's just make sure that this still works. I'm going to save it, I'm going to run it, and we get the same response. Good. Now, as far as ReadlineSync, we need to bring that in. So let's start by importing, we'll say import ReadlineSync, and we're going to import that from ReadlineSync. And then we might as well bring in colors as well. So we'll import colors from colors. And again, this is completely optional, but I think it's nice to have different colors for the bot and for the user. So as far as how ReadlineSync works, I want to show you that. I'm going to actually just get rid of all this right now because I just wanted to show you how that works. But for the ReadlineSync, the way that works, let's create a variable called username. And we'll set that to ReadlineSync, and then we're going to use the question method. So if we say .question, and we'll say, may I have your name? And then right under that, I'm going to console log, and we'll say, let's put some backticks in here. We'll just say hello, and then username. Okay, so I'm going to run this file again, and you'll see it says, may I have your name? And then it allows me to type. So I'm going to put in Brad, and it says, hello, Brad. So that's basically how this is going to work, this ReadlineSync. We're going to be using this question method. So we can get rid of that. And the first thing I want to happen when we run this file and we call this function is for it to just greet us and say, welcome to the chatbot program. You can start chatting with the bot. So let's do a console log, and I want this to be green. So what we can do is say colors, and I want it to also be bold. So I'm going to use bold and then dot green, and then put my message in there, and I'll say welcome. We'll say welcome to the chatbot program. And then let's copy that down. And then this text here is going to say you can start chatting with the bot. All right, so let's run the file again. And you can see that it's bold and green. Now, obviously it doesn't do anything else yet because we have nothing else here. So now what I want to do is instead of just having the question right in the function like this, because if I do that, it's only going to do it once, right? I want the conversation to keep going. So I'm going to have a while loop, and basically I'm just going to say while true. So it'll just continuously loop until we break out of it. And the way we're going to break out of it is by typing exit, and I'll add that in a second. But first, we want to be able to get the input from the user. So let's say const, and we'll say user. Let's say user input, and we're going to say ReadlineSync dot question. Okay, and I want this to be yellow, so I'm going to say colors dot yellow, and this, I'm not actually going to ask a question here. I just wanted to say the word you before whatever we type. So I'm going to say you colon space, like that. All right, so if I were to save this and then run this again, so it says welcome to the chat program, you can start chatting, and it says you colon, and then I can type. So I'll just say hello and hit enter. Now it's just going to keep doing that because we have it in a while loop, right? And we're not doing anything else with that input. We're not doing anything with the input. We're typing it in, we hit enter, it runs again, it says you again, and lets us type, but it's not actually doing anything. So we can get out of this though by doing Control or Command C. So that will clear us out for now. But I want a way to get out without having to do that. I want to be able to type exit. So under that user input, I'm actually going to open up a try catch, and in the catch we'll just do a console. We'll do a console.error, and we can make the error red too. So we'll do colors.red, and then whatever that error is. Okay, now in the try, I'm just going to put a comment here and say call the API with the user input, and we'll do that in a second, but I want a way to escape out of that loop. So let's say so basically I want to check to see if the user types in exit. So let's say if the user input, and then we'll make it all lowercase, so 2 lowercase, if that is equal to exit, then I want to return. So let's see if that works. So I'm going to run npm start, and we'll say hello. Okay, well, nothing else happens, but if I do exit, then it gets me out of the program, which is what I want. So now let's implement the API, and we're going to do it the same way that I just showed you. Let's create a variable here. I'll just call it completion, and let's set that to await, and we're going to use the OpenAI object and then the create chat completion method, and then we're going to pass into that an object. And remember, we pass in the model, which is going to be the GPT-3.5-turbo model. And then we want to pass in messages, which is going to be an array of objects that has a role, which for us is going to be user, and also has the content. Now, in this case, the content is going to be the user input. Okay. So whatever we type in here, when it says you and then we type it in, that's going to get sent to the API. Now we got to get the response from that. So let's go right underneath that, and let's say get get completion text slash content. So we'll say const, and I'll call this completion content or completion text. And let's set that to completion. And remember how that's formatted. We want to go into data, which is an object that has a choices array. And then that choices array has one item in it. So we want to get that. So we'll use the index of 0. Then we have a message object with content. So that'll give us the direct text that we want. All right. And then what we'll do is come down here. And let's see. We're going to go under this if statement, and we want to then console log the bot's answer. So here we're going to say colors, and I'm going to make this green. So where the user is yellow, the bot is green. So in here, let's say bot : space, and then I'm just going to add on to this the completion text like that. Now, when we exit, I also wanted to say goodbye or whatever, and we could hard code goodbye or some kind of message. But if we put in exit, it'll get sent to ChatGPT, and it will know that we're escaping, and it will come up with its own message. So we can actually put this in here as well, and that should work, how we expect. So let's save this, and let's go ahead and try it out. So we'll run npm start. It says I'm going to say hello. And the bot says, hi there, how can I assist you today? I'm going to say, what is the capital of Florida? And there we go. The capital of Florida is Tallahassee. Now, we have an issue. If you just want this to be, a one-off thing where you just ask one question, you get an answer, that's fine. But what if I say, what is the population? If I do that, it's going to tell me that it doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about. So to answer this question, specific information is needed. So basically, it's not seeing the last answer. And that's because when we send our data, our messages, we're only sending this. So we basically have to have a way to store our conversation history and send that with our requests. So let's do that next. So I'm going to go ahead and hit exit. Type exit, and you'll notice that it says goodbye. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask. And that's because of this right here. We added on the completion text. When we type exit, that completion text is this. So we don't even have to manually put in goodbye or whatever. So let's go ahead and come up to the top here, right above the loop, and let's initialize, let's say const chat history, and we're going to set that to just an empty array. So let's say store conversation history. Okay, and then what we're going to do is go, let's see, into the try, and let's go above where we call the API, and we're going to construct the messages by iterating over the history array. So let's create a variable called messages. And then we're going to set that to the chat history, and we're going to use map. So we're going to map over that, and then say, and then in here, actually, let's use parentheses because we're passing in a function, and then we're passing in some brackets with the role and the content. And we just want this to be an object. So I'm going to put another set of parentheses because I'm returning an object that has the role and the content. All right, so let's just put a comment here just to be clear on what this does. So we'll say construct messages by iterating over the history. All right, now we want to add the latest user input to the message array. So right under that, let's say add latest user input. So we'll say messages dot push, because we're pushing onto the array, an object with role, which is going to be user, and content, which is going to be the user input. Now, instead of passing that directly in here, we're going to pass in messages. Okay, now the last thing we want to do in order for this to work is update the chat history with the user input and assistant's response. So when it responds to us, that also needs to be saved to the chat history. So that's going to go at the very bottom, right? So under the console log here, let's say update history with, we'll say with user input and assistant response. So we'll do that by taking chat history, and we're going to push onto that. We're going to push, let's say, user, and then whatever the user input is. And then I'll just copy that down, and we're also going to push on the assistant. And that's going to be the completion text. And that should do it. So now let's try it again. I'm actually going to try it in the regular terminal here. Let's say npm start. Obviously, you have to be in the folder. So we'll say hello. I'll say, what is the capital of Florida? Capital of Florida is Tallahassee. Now I'll say, what is the population? And there we go. As of 2021, the estimated population is around 197,700. So what's happening is we're no longer just sending a single message to the API. We're sending the entire history. All right. So that's going to be it for what I want to do with this, but there's so much more you could add to this. You can make it so that your logs are saved in files. You could call different APIs, integrate different APIs for weather and whatever else. You could implement the new function calls, which I'm actually going to make a video on soon, and I'm probably going to use this same script and just add to it. But yeah, you could just keep this open on your desktop, and if you have any questions about anything, you could just ask, and it'll even generate code samples. Let's say create a Python script that makes a simple request to an API. Obviously, we're dealing with the terminal, so we are kind of limited in our output, but it should work. All right, so there we go, and you can see right here, certainly, here's an example of a simple Python script, and everything is in this block right here, so we could just simply copy that and put it into our file, and then it explains exactly what the code does. You could even make it so that when you ask for a code, you can have it create a file. You create a Python file with that code in it. I mean, there's so much you can do, and you can edit the prompt. What we're doing here is sending whatever we enter as the content, but you could prefix this with something, like speak to the user as if you were a travel agent or something like that. You can prefix this with whatever you'd like. We're just sending the straight input, so it's pretty simple. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this little project, and feel free to use it, add on to it, and I will see you next time.